I just need to start the recording in progress, right? So we can put the archive online. Great. Thank you, Self, for remembering to put that slide in. Okay. This is a webinar style Zoom meeting, which means that participants are here as listeners. You can't see yourselves, and the chat has been disabled. If you have any questions about what you're hearing today, and we actually encourage questions for our speakers, please use the Q&A box. This webinar is approved for the following continuing education credits: 1 mass pesticide license credit for categories 26, 25, 26, 27, 29, 31, 35, 36, 40, 48, and of course core. It's approved for the mass forester license, 1 MCA credit, also 1 MCH credit or MCLP credit, or half an MQTW credit. If you don't know what any of those mean, then it's okay. You probably don't qualify for those credits. And of course, we're welcoming any folks who are here, regardless of whether they need CEUs or not. In order to earn any of these credits, you need to stay for the entire webinar and answer all the poll questions that we're going to be posting. If you've been to any of our previous 2 sessions, then you might find that the first part of this talk is a bit familiar. And that's okay. You're still here earning credits, most of you. But I just don't want folks who are new to spotted lanternfly to not get any of the introductory information. So I'm going to go through it rather quickly. Spotted lanternfly is what we call a true bug. It's in the insect order Hemiptera. The scientific name is Lycorma delicatula. It is an invasive sap-sucking insect that is originally from Asia, was introduced here several years ago. Unfortunately, it has over 100 different host plants, including tree of heaven, which is itself an invasive species, but also native species like grapes, maple, walnut, and agricultural crops like hops. This is the spotted lanternfly life cycle. Like most insects, it starts off in the egg stage and then goes through 1, 2, 3, 4 different nymph or young unwinged versions of itself, also called instars, and then emerges in its adult form after it's gone through most of its life as a nymph. In terms of season, the eggs have been laid and are out right now and will be out for the winter. The instars hatch in the spring. The adults emerge in the summer and then mate and lay eggs. So we're here, right here in November, and I'm going to show this chart again later, dive a little deeper in there. In terms of the host range of spotted lanternfly, as I mentioned before, it has over 100 different host species, but I marked in bold here the species that are considered the major hosts. So lots of different trees, but it prefers tree of heaven, and later in the season, it often can be found on maple. It also likes walnut. It likes the sumac, so staghorn and smooth sumac. It feeds on blueberry and rose. It feeds on many different vines, including all the different grapes we have, and also Virginia creeper, and even Asiatic bittersweet. But even if the plants are woody, that doesn't mean they're not susceptible. It's known to attack basil and cucurbits like cucumber and squash and things like that. The reason we're concerned about spotted lanternfly is that it is a sap-sucking, or what we would technically call a phloem-feeding insect. So it's feeding on the sap that is rising from the roots and providing nutrition for the upper parts of the plant. When it feeds, it reduces the sugar production in the plant and also reduces photosynthesis and just general hardiness of a lot of different species. It can severely weaken the plants it feeds on, especially when it feeds on grape. They found that there's a lot of damage being seen and reduced grape production in vineyards in states where this pest has been found. When spotted lanternfly feeds, it is basically using its mouth parts like a straw and sucking up the juice, most of which is water. And it doesn't need the water, and also doesn't really need the sugars. It's looking for the more nutritious parts of that phloem. And so it just excretes the phloem as soon as it is passed through the digestive system, it causes the spotted lanternflies to excrete what you basically might call bug pee. It's waste product that is, the technical term is honeydew. It's wet, but it's also sticky and sugary. And then it attracts a fungal growth called sooty mold that smells really bad. So this is not great if you have this growing on your property. It also attracts the activity of stinging insects like wasps, hornets, and bees, and also ants will feed on the honeydew secretions and also at the wounds of the tree or other plant. This is just a close-up showing you what a heavily infested tree looks like being attacked by spotted lanternfly. The black parts here is that sooty mold growing, and then there's a secondary fungal growth that's white that is growing as well. This is just to show you on grapes what can happen when the sooty mold covers the leaves of the plant. That is an effective blocker of photosynthesis, which is going to negatively impact the health of any plant that it's covering. Now, if you don't have plants around, but you do have, say, some trees above your house, then the spotted lanternflies are still excreting all of that honeydew while they're feeding, but it's covering, your back porch or your stairs, which is a safety hazard because it can get really slippery when the fungus starts to grow. And also, again, it smells terrible. We have been told from folks in Pennsylvania that in heavily infested areas that it just, the sooty mold has a really nasty smell to it. So we first found out about spotted lanternfly back in 2014 when it was found at a stone yard in Berks County, Pennsylvania. It's thought to have possibly arrived a couple of years before that. Since 2014, it has spread to over 34 counties in Pennsylvania and has been found in over a dozen other states. This is the latest map we have from back in mid-October. Everything that is blue here is where a spotted lanternfly infestation is present. Anything with a little purple dot, I know that's hard to see, but you can see it all over New York, and yes, even in Massachusetts and Connecticut, is where they've had individual finds of spotted lanternfly, but don't believe an infestation is currently present there. This is a map, the latest map from Massachusetts as of October. Actually, we need to add another dot from Martha's Vineyard here, but that was another dead find. So any place you see a blue dot on this map is a place where we've had typically just an individual insect that was dead, in some cases maybe more than one, but all of these finds are just proof that lanternflies are being brought in here accidentally. But it's only this one city, Fitchburg, where we actually identified a small satellite population that you'll be hearing about from one of my coworkers in another few minutes. Spotted lanternfly can spread basically in two different ways. Either when the egg masses that are laid on pretty much any flat surface are transported from an infested area to an uninfested area, or when the adults or the nymphs hitchhike. So the adults can fly, but they don't fly long distances. So if they're getting from one state to another, it's because they're being accidentally brought there, either in a vehicle or in some kind of goods or services that's being shipped from one state to another. Same with the nymphs, although the nymphs can't fly at all. And of course, if the egg masses are laid on something like firewood or packing crates or actually on vehicles or trains or other methods of transportation, then that is a really effective way of spreading this pest. So one of the things that we've been doing in Massachusetts is kind of trying to take a look at where we need to really be concerned about the potential spread of this pest. And the current greatest risk of spread is just basically due to this to long-range transportation and shipping, and that means rail and transit pathways, especially ones that go through infested states. The green industry is also at risk when plants are being shipped from one place to another, or outdoor goods. We have a lot of high-value agricultural commodities like grapes and fruit trees and Christmas trees that are shipped from one place to another. And we also know that lanternflies have shown up at places like rest stops and gas stations on major highways and at ports of entry, along the coast, and basically any high traffic routes that have its main host, tree of heaven. So what should you be looking for right now? Again, here's this chart again. We're in December. Chances are, if there are any adult lanternflies still around, they're either dead or close to dead. Learned this great word to describe that the other day that I'm using here called moribund, which means that the adults have maybe hitchhiked here from another part of the country, and since they need to feed fairly constantly to stay alive, by the time they get here, since they haven't fed in so long, they're pretty much close to dead, or they were treated with a pesticide in the area that they were shipped from, and they come in dead or close to dead because of that. But also, and what we're going to be covering a lot of information about today, we're really concerned about the egg masses, because the lanternflies have mated and have now died off because we've had a hard freeze, at least in Massachusetts. But the egg masses survive the winter with no problem. So in terms of identification, we're going to talk today about a little bit about identifying the adults, but a little bit more about identifying egg masses. Just gonna check the time here. Okay. The adults are fairly large insects compared to a lot of what we see in Massachusetts. Body size about an inch long, gray spotted forewings, and vibrant red hind wings. When the specimens are spread, like we have in the picture in the bottom left-hand corner here, you can really see the hind wings. And sometimes when people see this picture, they think that lanternflies are some kind of a butterfly, but you'll notice that they lack the really prominent antenna that you would see on a butterfly or a moth. They have a yellow and black abdomen. The yellow can expand and become really pronounced on the females, especially as they become gravid or full of eggs, close to when they're going to mate at the end of the season. Here's some pictures from actual reports that we've gotten here in Massachusetts of lanternflies over the past couple months. They all came in dead. You might find them on the pavement in a parking lot of a nursery, or in some pumpkins that were shipped, or you might not even know how it came in, but somehow it came in on something that was shipped to you, probably from an infested state. We are always really grateful when the public sends these reports into us so that we can verify that there's, go out and do a survey, verify that there's no spotted lanternfly infestation there, and possibly track back to the company that was involved with either coming here from an infested area or shipping goods here from an infested area, just to make sure that they're going through the proper protocols to make sure that they're not spreading lanternflies. But what we're really concerned about right now, and I think that my coworker Astra is going to talk a little bit about some of the egg mass surveys that her team is planning for this winter, is teaching you guys about egg masses and what to look for, because the egg masses are only about an inch and a half long. Each mass contains maybe 30 to 50 eggs. And the egg masses are typically covered with this grayish brown putty-like covering, which means that depending on what kind of a surface they're laid on, they can be pretty cryptic or hard to determine what you're looking at. And again, they might be laid on virtually any flat surface, and they are going to be viable over the winter. The cold is, even if we have some kind of like a polar vortex where it gets really cold, chances are a lot of these eggs can survive. They, spotted lanternfly comes from a temperate climate, so they've evolved to be able to overwinter in this life stage. This is a really nice graphic that Penn State Extension put out that I wanted to show you, where we have four different looks of the way the egg masses can look. So normally you're going to see a fresh egg mass is going to be completely covered with this like muddy-like substance, because the female is trying to do that to protect her offspring. But sometimes, for various reasons, the females don't don't cover the entire egg mass. So you might see it partially covered, like picture 2, or there's no covering at all for whatever reason. And also once the egg mass is hatched, the look of it kind of changes. So the 4th picture here where it says weathered is an egg mass that's at least 1 season old. You can actually see the little marks where the eggs were, and the nymphs have already hatched out and abandoned this mass here. And now I'm going to show you a whole ton of pictures of other egg masses, so you get that really good like search image in your brain in case you see something suspicious. The first picture on the left is a heavily infested tree, just that you can see that the females don't necessarily try to spread out when they're laying these eggs. Like this is several dozen females have laid all of these egg masses on the tree here. In the middle, we get a little bit closer. These are fresh egg masses. You have 3 of them in a row down the tree. You can see that the first one, she didn't quite finish covering it, so it's exposed there. And then the 3rd picture, the one on the right, this is an old or weathered egg mass. You can see that it gets kind of crackly and crumbly and changes over time as it gets weathered in the elements. Here are a couple more pictures. For some reason, spotted lanternfly seems to they find a lot of the egg masses on like rusty metal. So you see this metal barrel on the right with tons of egg masses right down near the ground. They don't seem to really discriminate in terms of where they lay their eggs, high up or down low. Here's some, a metal post next to I don't know if this is a fence post or I forget, it might be a telephone pole. But you can see that the females are still on here laying eggs over other egg masses that other females lay. And yes, they will lay them on tires, they will lay them on camping equipment, they will lay them on a rusty metal spade. They do not discriminate. So you kind of need to keep an eye out everywhere. The one big lookalike we have around here that you might confuse with spotted lanternfly egg masses would be Lymantria dispar, formerly known as gypsy moth caterpillars, the egg masses that the moths lay. So this is a great graphic from UMass Extension that I have quote unquote borrowed for the purposes of this webinar. On the left, we have the gray putty-like covering over a lanternfly egg mass. On the right, you notice that the Lymantria dispar egg mass is much larger and is more of like a pale rusty orange brown. If you can look very closely, you will see that there are these little like pin pricks in the photo here, and that is actually a parasitoid that is attacking the Lymantria dispar egg masses. This is another. It was a very rainy season, so we were getting a lot of reports from people that thought they found spotted lanternfly egg masses in the late summer, but it was actually fungal growths on trees. Okay, so let's see how good you are at identifying spotted lanternfly egg masses. Take a close look at this picture and try to figure out how many egg masses you can see. This is a river birch. And I'm going to leave this up for a second, and then I'm going to use this as our first poll question. So really get in there and take a look. I'm going to leave it up for another few seconds. Now I'm going to go over to poll question. I'm going to go back here, attempt to launch the poll question. Here we go. All right, the poll has been launched. Panelists, if you're wondering, I don't think you can answer these. Anyway, how many egg masses do you think that you are seeing on this river birch? Just going to give folks a chance to answer. Again, just a reminder, if you're hoping to get pesticide license credits, you need to answer all of the poll questions. And there's a couple hundred of you here, so if you all email me afterwards and claim that you couldn't answer the poll questions, I am not going to be able to help you. All right, we're getting close to 200. Also, you don't have to answer the poll questions correctly in order to get credit. All right, we're at 202. I'm going to give it another 5 seconds. Still having votes come in. 89% participation. All right, I'm going to give it 3 more seconds, 2 more seconds. All right, I feel like that's been enough time. I'm going to end the poll. I'm going to share the results, which I expect it to be spread out like this. Hopefully you guys can see this. The most people said they thought they saw 5. We also have 4 pretty high. If you said 11, you were a little bit off base. I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to close that, go to the next screen. Hold on. There we go. All right. So luckily, Colin Purrington, who put this picture, before and after picture together, did a really nice graphic where he identified the egg masses so that you can see them. These are weathered egg masses, and it's a river birch. So given the way the bark looks and the fact that these egg masses are old, I wouldn't expect anybody, especially over the internet, looking at this rather than being in person, to really understand that there were only 4 egg masses here, or that there were as many as 4 egg masses here, but that's how many there were. So thank you to everybody for participating. All right, so we're gonna switch gears here, and I would like to ask Astra to unmute, and I think I need to give you permission to share the screen. I have done that. This would be where I ask you to share your PowerPoint, Astra. Can you check in with me? There.
It should be.
Okay, great.
Let me see if I can present this. Wow. Can you guys see just the thing or like the next?
It's not the presentation, it's like the preview.
All right. Let me get out of here. Hang on. Nope, that's gonna be the wrong thing.
The way that I did it was that I stopped sharing and then I went back and started the presentation, and then I shared that presentation screen. It's like 2 different windows in on my laptop. Maybe that helps you.
Yeah, that's kind of what was happening with mine too. Let's see.
You can also try.
It wants me to present in Teams, but we're not in Teams.
No, don't do that.
I had this earlier. Hang on.
That's okay. I'm gonna look at the Q&A.
I just want to present. I also cannot see because it is in. Am I wrong? All right, I'm going to stop sharing here. Hang on.
Okay. All right.
Let me get this up. Sorry, guys. Typically deficient. All right, slideshow.
So somebody asked, are female spotted lanternflies attracted to existing egg masses via pheromones? Not to my knowledge, no. The pheromones would only work to attract females to males, or vice versa. And this, somebody else asked about the egg mass photos. So this is being recorded and is going to be on our YouTube channel probably sometime next week, and you guys will get an email with a link. Astra, that looks perfect.
Great.
I am gonna let you go.
Okay, sorry about that delay. So I'm one of the SLF technicians for MDAR. I'm the person going out, putting out traps, doing these trapping surveys, checking reports, and we'll be doing egg mass surveys over the winter. So I apologize if these first couple slides are a little bit repetitive from Jen's, but here we go. So this year we selected 50 sites across the state that we determined to be higher risk for spotted lanternfly infestations. It's based on a variety of criteria, including whether there's Ailanthus present, is it a business that receives goods from infested areas often, are they agricultural areas which are at greater risk for significant impact, such as vineyards and orchards. And then also of concern were transportation pathways. As Jen said, the SLF will lay their egg masses on just about any flat surface. So trucks, train cars are considered to be one of the highest risk pathways. And although many agricultural sites in the infested areas are complying with treatment restrictions, SLF is so prolific that it can hop onto cars. It can, avoid the spray if it's at the edge of something. So getting everything is nearly impossible. And so railways and trucking centers can become a significant threat to our own environmental economy. So our survey methods, so at each of the 50 predetermined sites, we walked the property, the parcel, and determined the presence of Ailanthus. And that's all recorded into Keleher on the USDA's AGOL so that we can, have a better understanding of how the spread of Ailanthus is shown across our state and where we want to be checking and surveying the most. And then each of the trees that we found was surveyed from the ground. I don't know how many of you are familiar with ground survey, but basically you want to look at all 4 sides of the trees to determine the presence of any egg masses, nymphs, or adults. And that just basically means that you're standing on one side of a tree for 5 to 20 minutes, depending on the size of the tree, and just really scanning up the trunk and out each branch as far as you can see, to see if you see anything suspicious. So trapping, so we've set a trap at each of the 50 sites. This just increases our chance of catching any undetected SLF. This picture is of a circle trap, and it's a mesh screen that wraps around the tree, stapled onto the tree, and then any pests will crawl up into the bag where they cannot escape. This particular trap has a pesticide strip. You want to kill anything that comes up into the bags so that you can see what you've caught. The traps are just a generalized pest lure, so a lot of insects will climb up into the bag. Ants are interested. Sometimes we get like grasshoppers, katydids, spiders in the little thing here, try to kill everything that is going in there, but you'll get a lot of bycatch. There's another trapping method called bug barriers. These are sticky bands that are turned inside out, and they have some like foam or it's kind of like, it's almost like an insulation. It's a cotton substance that's underneath it. And so these are just wrapped around the trunk, and they're effective for catching nymphs. What they do is they just make anything crawling up the tree have to sort of like avoid this cotton barrier, and then they go onto the sticky plastic and get stuck. And so they're good for nymphs, and they don't affect larger animals' ability to climb the tree. It also keeps birds from being able to try to get the bugs off of the sticky band. So all of these traps, both the circle and the bug barrier, are trapped bi-weekly for our full season, which for us is May to just about now. We actually just took down our traps last week. So these were our trapping locations for this year. As you can see, there's a good spread across the whole state. Many of these are in places where there's going to be an entrance from another state into the Commonwealth, or places where transportation trucks and stuff are going to stop, so lots of rest areas. Some of these are also previous reports from past years that we thought were going to be a possible susceptible area in the state. So SLF was not detected in any of our originally planned traps this year, but an infestation was discovered on a tree and a circle trap had been placed on after a public report, and that was in Fitchburg. So in late July, we got a report on our pest reporting site. write this down if you're in Massachusetts, and report to us if you see anything suspicious. But this was a 4th instar, and this is the actual photo that got sent in. We were able to determine right away that, it was indeed SLF, and it is a 4th instar. And it was on a vehicle, and the reporter took the picture and then was looking up what it was, basically. And when they looked back, they had lost it. But they got the picture, and that's the most important part. So we went out to the property and we assessed it. This is again late July, so it's still nymphal season. We looked at all the trees. The building that it was reported at is surrounded with Ailanthus, and it's also bordered by some major roads in Fitchburg, and the rail line is basically on the property. So they were all surveyed, and then traps were placed on either side of the building on Ailanthus trees. And then they were checked basically bi-weekly from that report, so that was late July. And because it was a live report, a quarter-mile delimitation area was surveyed. So as you can see in this picture, that is a quarter-mile radius. And all high-impact hosts were checked, as well as the surfaces of some of the buildings, even though it was kind of early for egg masses at that point. So the delimitation surveys are done to determine how widespread the infestation might be, and where its limits are. And then per the USDA APHIS guidelines, host material within the zone is recorded and surveyed. So nothing was seen. And then at one point, our trap got damaged by the remnants of one of the hurricanes that came through, and the entire bag was missing. So we actually had to replace that, as well as re-glue the plastic cup that holds the bag on there. And so that kind of threw off our survey a bit. And then the next time the traps were checked, which corresponded with the beginning of the adult life stage, we found some SLF on the original trees that we had put these circle traps on, as well as the old bag, which was like blown across the property, which had SLF in it. So upon another visual survey, we saw several adult SLF on these original trees. And this is unfortunately quite common when we're performing visual surveys at suspected sites. SLF are very good at hiding from ground surveyors, especially when they're smaller. We've seen with multiple departments, USDA, us, others, that you really have to go out and survey multiple times, and you also have to really just believe that they're there and spend a lot of time just focusing really hard in the canopy and stuff to see these guys, especially at first. So we added extra bugberry traps to our secondary stems. It was a multi-stem tree that was closest to the original report. And then we performed another visual sweep of the property. This triggered an even larger and more intense survey of the area. So surveyors from the USDA came out to help us, and we also had some other MDAR staff called in. We redid that quarter-mile delimitation, which you can see in the center here is very thick now with points. And then decided to do a grid survey, which is 20 points per grid around the original find, and you target higher value areas where there's better host material, etc. And so we allotted to do a 4 kilometer by 4 kilometer grid around Fitchburg, because we are really worried that this was going to be our intro into Massachusetts, and that it was going to be, a much larger infestation than we've seen so far. So the grid survey is a secondary form, which I just said. It just helps us to determine the spread. 20 points per grid are surveyed. A point is any host material and all vegetation and surfaces within a 30-foot radius of the tree. So it's a lot of area, even if it's just defined here as 1 point. And then Ailanthus is targeted if possible. However, other hosts can be used if it does not have a lot of tree of heaven. Other hosts being grape, bittersweet. They do tend to like vines. They like maples in the fall, especially red and silver, walnut, river birch, etc. Beyond performing these grid surveys, we continue to monitor the originally infested trees. We would spend part of our time on our grid survey, just going to the OG trees and surveying for adults or egg masses. If at all possible and we could get the adults, we knocked them out of the tree and we smashed them or collected them. And then any egg masses spotted were scraped off the trees and destroyed. And eventually DCR came out to perform both a systemic and a foliar treatment. And Nicole will talk to you about that in a little bit. I do highly recommend just getting an extendable pole. You can get them at Home Depot if you have infestations that you find, and you can scrape them, these egg masses, pretty well with those if you just put some kind of thing like tool on the end of it. Works really well to destroy the egg masses. And you want to really scrape them so that they're falling apart and the eggs are destroyed. So our survey plans for this winter are going to be egg mass surveys at several sites across the state. We're focusing again in Fitchburg, as well as other parts of the city that we hadn't surveyed that are farther away but are high risk. So intermodal sites like the municipal airport, there's rail yards, etc. And they have large populations of Ailanthus altisma. And they actually have been looked at briefly by USDA, I believe, but with the leaf off, we can see a lot more of the tree. It's a lot easier to do this kind of survey than when it's, high summer and there's tons of leaves. So then we're going to do some other egg mass surveys across the state at different locations where we've had public reports and we determined to be relatively high risk from its surrounding area, whether that be transportation, agriculture, etc. And then most of the surveys will be gridded point surveys like those that we performed around the Fitchburg find. Oh, and that is all I have. So I'll stop sharing. Jen, I don't know if you had any poll questions made up for that.
I do. I'm very excited to share it. Just give me a sec to get back on the screen. Thank you very much, Astra. I especially thank you for showing lots more pictures of egg masses. I feel like everybody who is watching this webinar should have a really good search image in their brains in order to be able to recognize these going forward. Also, we're going to take questions at the end around 10:50 or so. So I encourage folks to use the Q&A function to leave questions for Astra and then for Nicole, who's going to be speaking very shortly. Let me go to the poll. All right, the poll question has been launched. Where was the satellite population of spotted lanternfly found in Massachusetts? Was it 1, Framingham, 2, Fitchburg, 3, Farmington, or 4, Florence? I feel like this is going to be a little less challenging than the first poll question. I do see folks raising their hand. You should instead avail yourself of the Q&A to ask questions there, and the panelists, will get back to you. We're going to take all the questions for the speakers in the Q&A, not through hand raising. Always. Also, I'm going to leave this. Oh, we're close to 92% participation. I don't want to miss my chance to give a shout out to Miss Forsyth's class at Norfolk Aggie, who are all watching and learning right now about spotted lanternfly. So thank you, Miss Forsyth, for forcing your students to learn about this invasive pest. All right, I'm going to end the poll right now. And I'm going to share the results and show you that the majority of folks got it right, that yes, it was Fitchburg where that Astra was just talking about, where the satellite population of spotted lanternfly was found. We got 95% of folks got it right, so good for you. Okay, let's see. I think at this point, the next step would be for us to, I'm going to stop sharing and allow Nicole Keleher to take over the screen. Nicole is, see, I closed my window with your title, so I hope that you have your title on there. Forest Pest Program Director. I know I'm not getting that right. Director of Forest Health.
I'm
Health
the
Director.
Forest Health Director, yes.
There we go. I apologize. Nicole was not, I mean, yes, she was nice enough to come, join us today and talk about what DCR did to assist us with the satellite population in Fitchburg. But more importantly, she and her staff were available to help MDAR at, to effect a really quick response to the find that we had in Fitchburg. So we're really grateful for that. All right. And there you go. You are sharing. I'm going to hand the mic over to you.
Great. Thanks, Jen. So my name is Nicole, and I am the Forest Health Director with the Department of Conservation and Recreation. So I lead our forest health program. And my program works really closely with MDAR on a lot of different pests and topics and projects that come up. And there's a lot of overlap between our programs. And we each have a lot of strengths within our staff and our skill sets that really make a collaborative effort be the most successful for a lot of these attacks against these invasive species. So for spotted lanternfly, it is mostly agricultural concern. It does have a tree component, though it's less of a threat to our trees and more of a nuisance, and it is attracted to an invasive tree that we don't really like having anyway. But my team is more knowledgeable in pesticide treatments on trees and some on the ground attacks for these invasive pests. So we were able to get out and help at the Fitchburg site. So the timing of our treatments was not ideal. So this was kind of a very rapid response, as Jen mentioned, and really an attempt to be aggressive at this site and to eradicate this localized population. So it was found in late summer when Astra and her team were out ground surveying. They really only identified these, I'll call them 2 trees. So there was one multi-stem tree and then the one smaller tree several feet away. That these were the only locations where we saw any spotted lanternfly adults or egg masses. So it was trying to attack this small location, and what could we do very quickly late in the season to minimize any adults that were on these trees. So by the time we were able to treat, so by the time immediate delimitations were done, by the time we were able to meet, so me and my team meeting with Jen and other MDAR representatives and determining that treatment was the best option and what we actually wanted to do, and then getting weather to line up, because I know a lot of you out there are pesticide applicators too, and you know that treatments have to be under certain conditions. You can't have a lot of active rain. We had a very wet year this year, so timing up, we ended up doing our treatment on September 27th. So much later in the season than you would typically treat for spotted lanternfly. In areas like down in Pennsylvania and other states that have established populations, when they do their pesticide treatments, they typically do it to create trap trees, and they use a systemic product of Dinotefron, and their treatments are usually timed between May and August. So you want to treat your tree, allow the pesticide to get fully incorporated into the tree, into the stems, twigs, foliage. And then when your late nymphs and adults are attracted to that tree and start feeding, that chemical is there and causes significant mortality before you ever even have reproductive success between your adults. We're very late to the game. We were getting there when we already saw active adults. We already saw females laying eggs. So we wanted to take steps that were to minimize the amount of successful adults that were there, to minimize any adults that were still present, and particularly gravid females from jumping on a car, train, the wind, and hitchhiking away. So we took a two-step approach. So even though it was late September, we did have a really warm September. So the tree was still really green. It had a lot of good foliage, was moving a lot of material around. So we could still do our systemic Dinotefron treatments. And we could also, we wanted to do a contact pesticide. We chose to use bifenthrin for this. And that was in the foliage and upper canopy where most of the spotted lanternfly were actively located at that time. So these are the two trees that were treated. So the one 3-stemmed tree, and then the smaller single stem that was about 10 feet away from it. Both of these growing right out of a crack. There was almost no soil around them. They were directly in pavement. So right between this parking lot and a sidewalk that was along a roadside. So the bifenthrin, we used cross-check, and that was mixed into a water solution and then sprayed directly onto the foliage. So another strength that my team has is we have a bucket truck. Part of the forest health program is we have hazard tree crews that deal with all our arboricultural needs and hazard trees in our DCR properties. And so my team was able to come out and help me use the bucket truck. I don't usually get in the bucket truck. I'm not good at the controls. So I was lucky to have someone from my team, JD, come out and actually move me around so I could get into all that foliage and get the bifenthrin sprayed onto the areas where the spotted lanternfly was located. So bifenthrin is a quick acting contact pesticide. So insects that come directly in contact are then killed. We also used a Dinotefron product. So we used Moshe Dinocide HP capsules. So when treating Ailanthus for spotted lanternfly using Dinotefron, there's two methods you can use. So you can do a basal bark spray, which is where you mix a Dinotefron product into a solution and spray it directly onto the bark from the ground level to about 5 feet up. And the tree actually absorbs the chemical in through its bark and then moves it throughout the entire tree. And then the other is a stem injection. So you drill holes and you're directly injecting the product into the tree, and then the tree is moving the product throughout it. Since we were doing a spray of the bifenthrin, we chose to do an injection of the Moshe Dinocide since we didn't want any chemicals mixing. So by having these directly injected, we had no risk of contamination from the bifenthrin and the Dinotefron. These trees are smaller, so we were unable to treat the smaller second tree with a direct injection because there's a minimized size requirement. Since you put a lot of product into one hole, covers a bit of area on the diameter of a tree. And so when you have a really small tree, doing an injection, it doesn't put enough chemicals spread around, and it's not really helpful. I know this is challenging to say. It's not healthy for the tree to do treatments like that for a tree that we don't like and don't care about and lives in a crack in the sidewalk. But we still do have to follow pesticide label restrictions and general use guidelines. So it was late in the season for this kind of pesticide treatment, but since the trees were still green, we saw very little foliage change at that point. It was a little slower than the uptake is, but it did take in the chemical. And this moves pretty quickly. A tree's typically within a few days can move the Dinotefron from the base all the way up into the canopy. And then when any lingering adults feed on that tree, then they ingest the Dinocide and hopefully die. So we wanted to take this a kind of aggressive two-step approach. And though it wasn't an ideal time for treatments, and if you had a larger widespread population, you wouldn't be targeting trees in this way. But since we only had these two identified trees where we were seeing spotted lanternfly, we wanted to minimize any risk of this population staying at this site or any adults that were present on these trees moving to future sites. And after the first frost, the property manager for this site did have the trees removed and destroyed. So if spotted lanternflies for egg masses, chipping wood material is a good way to destroy the egg masses and to stop the risk of that population emerging the next spring. So during winter months, chipping and destroying any trees can be a good way to destroy any potential egg masses that could be present on them. So the MDAR team will be out in the spring to see if we were effective, but hopefully this in combination with the trappings, the survey, and then the tree removal can eliminate this localized satellite population. So they're using the chat function for any questions you might have. I just like to share these historic pictures. So my position used to be called the Moth supervisor. And their goal was to destroy any brown-tailed moth and gypsy moth populations. And my program has a long history of using IPMs and pesticides to handle some of our invasive species. And as we get these new species in, working with other agencies like MDAR to attack these problems head on.
Thank you very much. We've got one more section to cover, and then we are going to have a general Q&A. Hopefully, I should have checked, Nicole, you're available to stay through the end of the session?
Yep, yeah, I
Okay,
can.
great. So keep putting those questions in. We'll answer as many as we can. I just want to cover a few more things. So I'm going to attempt to share my screen again. Okay. In terms of getting resources and of course reporting any sightings that you might see of spotted lanternfly, adults, nymphs, or egg masses, I just put this link in the chat, massnrc.org/pest/SLF. You can go there and get the latest map of finds in Massachusetts. You can see a list of host plants. You can download and print out any of the guides and checklists that I have a gallery of at the bottom of the page. We are asking folks in general to be good about checking their own vehicles, any nursery stock that's coming in, any goods that are coming in from states with known infestations. We're also asking you, do you deal with any businesses that are in states with major spotted lanternfly infestations? If you do, you should be asking them what they're doing to prevent the spread of spotted lanternfly to Massachusetts. This includes businesses that maybe aren't in an infested state, but that are importing material from infested states to then resell. Because we know that that happens for a lot of different goods and materials, not just nursery stock. The other thing I just want to briefly cover here is something that I'm asking folks to do so that we have the best chance of slowing or stopping the spread of spotted lanternfly over the next season, especially now that we found that satellite population in Fitchburg that we're hoping we eradicated, but a lot of survey is going to have to go on to prove that that was the case. And what I wanted to talk to folks about was the identification of Tree of Heaven with the goal of possibly logging, finding stands of this pest tree that are outside of the areas where we already know that it exists. So as a couple of us have already mentioned, Tree of Heaven is itself an invasive species. It was introduced to the US centuries ago as an ornamental tree. At that time, it was very prized in the estate gardens of very wealthy people who were only gardening with ornamentals rather than growing things for food in their gardens. It is a very large and aggressively growing tree. You saw how big those trees got just growing out of a seed that fell in the crack of a sidewalk in Fitchburg. If you've ever read the book A Tree Grows in Brooklyn, this is the tree that they're talking about. These plants grow so fast that the root system can crack underground pipes or damage the foundations of houses when they do grow. And when they get cut, if they're not treated, or even sometimes if they are treated, they can resprout from cut trunks and also sucker from their roots. And again, this is a tree that is very common in urban areas. It has a definite correlation with rail lines and highways. If any of you ride the commuter rail or get stuck driving into Boston on the Pike or driving around Worcester or Springfield, you will see that these trees line the roads and they line the railways. In terms of identification, Tree of Heaven has what they call pinnately compound leaves. So what you're looking at is a single leaf. And what you might think are leaves are actually leaflets. They're just all part of one major leaf. And what you can do in order to identify this plant when it has leaves on it, so in the spring and summer, is look for these lobes at the base of each leaflet. So each leaflet has smooth edges, not toothed, except for this one lobe at the bottom on one side. Compare this to another native type of plant that grows in the same kind of environments, in roadsides and disturbed areas, the sumacs, either smooth sumac or staghorn sumac. And you'll see that they have the same leaf arrangement, but that the leaflets are very obviously toothed along the edges. There are also other trees with these pinnately compound leaves that are part of our native forest, things like ash, walnut, and hickory. But again, the leaflets are all toothed on these plants. Also, if you crush the leaves of Tree of Heaven, they have this awful sort of funky scent that people describe as smelling like rotten peanut butter. Tree of Heaven flowers are pretty nondescript, and they are much easier to identify when the plants start to produce fruit. But they have separate male and female plants, so you're only going to see these on the female plants. For a few weeks in the late summer, you get these brilliant sort of sundown, sunset-like colors, these gold and red and orange colors on the fruits. Eventually, they dry into these very papery, what are called achenes, that are a light brown color and are meant to be wind dispersed. So they will catch on the wind, but you'll see them retained on the tree sometimes far into the winter, except that in very urban areas where there's a lot of wind along roadsides, then they lose the seeds pretty quickly. Compare this again to those same staghorn and smooth sumacs. You'll notice that the fruits are fairly distinctively different on the sumacs. They're these little tiny red balls, and the fruit heads look very fuzzy and they're very tightly compact. Right about now, the leaves have fallen off, so we use these winter characteristics of bud scars and bark to identify Tree of Heaven. I don't know, I call this an angry clown face. And obviously I have an issue with clowns, that's for me to deal with, but to me this looks like a big, like, evil smiling face. This is the bud scar of Tree of Heaven. It is fairly distinctive compared to other trees that you're going to see, especially in urban areas. It's to me, it looks like a mouth. I know that's pareidolia. I'm seeing human faces on everything, but you can also look at the characteristic bark of Tree of Heaven. It tends to be smooth and rather green on young trees. As the tree matures, it looks more like the skin of a cantaloupe, like the picture on the right. If you get really good at identifying Tree of Heaven, you can spot it from the street or from Google Street View, like in this photo here. The reason why I'm asking is because we have this project that we have on iNaturalist, where we are tracking not just spotted lanternfly finds, but also Tree of Heaven. If you're not familiar with iNaturalist, this is a map of all the citizen science reports of Tree of Heaven from iNaturalist.org. So this is just anybody that's out there with a smartphone that is taking pictures of things that they say are Tree of Heaven, and then the other members of iNaturalist either confirm or deny, and if it's an approved record, it goes into the database. What are we seeing here? Well, there's a lot of people that use the iNaturalist app that are in the Boston area, so that's kind of biased, but you do definitely see these clusters in major urban areas. So over here in Springfield and along the highway here, in the Worcester area and in the Boston area and kind of around the Boston area. But I also see a lot of areas here that don't have any orange squares. And that doesn't mean that there's no tree of heaven there. It means that there's no reports from there. Specifically, what we're interested in is folks that are willing to help us by using the iNaturalist app to identify stands of tree of heaven that are near where they live or work, but specifically in suburban and rural areas. So, you know, at this point, I don't think we need any more reports from the Boston area or the Worcester area. You saw that map. It's pretty well covered. You can also make assumptions. They've done models that show that since tree of heaven is associated with urban areas, that that's where they're going to tend to be. What we're interested in is, you know, if you see one in a suburban or rural area, if you put that record into iNaturalist, we can use that as a way of potentially tracking or monitoring for spotted lanternfly. Okay, that was, okay, 11:02, not bad. That was the lead up to our last poll question, which I'm going to deploy right now. That should be it. There we go. Okay, last poll question. Which of these is not a good way to identify tree of heaven? So again, we're asking which of them is not a good ID character. Is it each leaflet has a distinct lobe at the bottom? Is it the bark looks like cantaloupe skin? Is it the bud scars look like the smile of an evil clown? Or is it that the fruits are clusters of fuzzy red balls? So one of those does not describe tree of heaven. We'll give you guys another 10 to 15 seconds or so to answer. All right. 5 more seconds before we end the poll. We're at 91% participation, so thank you to everybody. I'm going to end it right now. Okay, share the results. That did trip up a few of you, but if you were paying attention, you already know, you know that the trees with fruits that are clusters of fuzzy red balls are the sumacs, not tree of heaven. So thank you. All right, let's see where we are. What's next? Okay. Our next webinar is going to be February 15th. That's next year, also at 10 a.m. as usual. If you registered for this webinar, you will get an email with a link allowing you to register for the next webinar if you choose. As I noted before, this is the link massnrc.org/pests/SLF, where you can get all the latest info about spotted lanternfly in Massachusetts. Our free outreach materials can be ordered from this link. I am going to put it into the chat as soon as I stop talking. You can also follow us on Twitter at @MassPests. That will get you information about all kinds of invasive pests and weeds and pathogens in our state. If you feel like you want to learn even more about spotted lanternfly, our webinars are archived on our YouTube channel. You can search for the Mass Department of Agricultural Resources on YouTube, or you can go to this link, which I will also put in the chat shortly, which is bit.ly/MDAR YouTube. That is case sensitive. If you go to our earlier updates, you can see we had some live streams from infested states, Delaware and New Jersey, where you can really see how bad things get once this pest really kicks in. All right, that was our last slide. Now I'm going to go over to the Q&A and somehow multitask and put links into the chat. This is a lot easier when there are two of us doing it. I'm going to stop sharing. Go over to the Q&A. Right, there's one question. So Astra and Nicole, if you could, well, you might need to both unmute, but anyway, there was a question I wanted to ask Astra, actually, that was about the egg masses.
I just answered a bunch while you were talking, Jen.
Oh no,
so
you were not supposed to do that because that
I'm
was
sorry.
live answering. So okay,
we can re-answer them.
Yeah. So can you answer the question about if you felt the way an egg mass feels? That was the one that, yeah. What do the egg masses feel like? Are they hard, soft, or rubber-like? I assume that changes as they age. So did you have, yeah, if you could weigh in on that, that would be useful.
Yeah, so at first they are soft and they do basically feel kind of like clay. It is a covering that the females are using to help their offspring survive. So it's kind of clay-like. And then the best I can describe the older ones is like unfired clay, like dried but unfired. So I don't know if you have experience with that, but I mean, it cracks with weather and expanding and contracting due to like the heat, the temperature of the outside. So that's kind of the closest I could describe it as.
Okay, good. Thank you. Definitely an important question here that I'm going to answer live. For those of you that are looking for pesticide license credits, those are going to be processed by Thanksgiving. So if you registered properly and put in your correct license information, you attended the entire webinar and answered all of the poll questions, then you will receive an email with an attachment with your certificate with your license credit. For the other continuing education credits, those are all handled through I can't think of the right term right now, but basically you have to fill out your own form. You're not going to get a certificate from us. You got an email proving that you were registered. So that should be enough from our end for those other credits. Let's see. Okay. Somebody asked if spotted lanternfly has a preference for a particular age range of tree hosts. That is a good question, and I will let Astra step in and correct me if I say this wrong, but it's not, to my knowledge, they don't have a preference for age range. We did note, we had a discussion with someone at Penn State University about the way that they will, it's more about when the sap is flowing in the plants. So at the end of the season, Tree of Heaven it senesces sooner than maples do. And so as the sap flow dies down in Tree of Heaven, they will move over to maple because the sap is still running in those, and they will start feeding on those plants and damaging them. Somebody asked if they were attracted, if spotted lanternfly is attracted to UV lights. I am a long-time black lighter for insects, and I have not asked this question. I need to know it. I don't know it. If somebody else knows, they can answer it. I will try to put a note in the emails we send out. I don't think they're attracted to lights, but I haven't heard anything. And I guess we're lucky enough that I don't know the answer in Massachusetts yet because they haven't become widespread here. Okay, let's see. Somebody noted there's a few Tree of Heaven at Sandy Point State Park on Plum Island, mostly eroding into the ocean. Okay. Yeah, basically we don't have the resources to go around and try to remove Tree of Heaven, at least not right now, and certainly not in an area that is going to involve conservation commissions and removing. So, but I would say that anybody that knows of any little hidden pockets of Tree of Heaven, please use an app like iNaturalist to report them so that we can get it into our database. So thank you for that information.
Jen, I'd also like to just, a lot of people were asking about why didn't we just remove the tree?
Yes.
And I think Nicole went over that a little bit, but it's basically that we don't want adults hitchhike on that material. So we want to wait until everything's died off and there's been like a hard frost, and then we want to cut those trees and chip them on site down to 1 inch by 1 inch chips, which is research so far has shown that that's enough to stop any eggs from being viable. But that's why we didn't just do it right away, because, you know, we need to know that everything's gone, nothing's jumping off, etc.
Yes,
so a lot of people ask that.
Thank you. Yeah, and I know Nicole brought this up as well in terms of chipping the trees and then using the chips. There's a peer-reviewed paper out talking about, as Astra noted, that as long as you chip the tree small enough, the egg masses are getting shredded and destroyed. But in the case of Fitchburg, the chips were incinerated. So there's no issue of spread. But thank you for that question. That's a good one. Just kind of going through here. Let's see. Somebody did ask how many questions were there. There were 3 poll questions. If you did stay for this whole thing, you would have heard us refer to all 3 of them. I don't know how else to answer that. Somebody's asking, is bifen or alpine the only recommended treatment? Would conserve be an option? Nicole, if you can answer this, go ahead. If you can't, I totally understand.
Yeah, so I would say what we did at the Fitchburg site is not typical for what kind of treatment approach happens. Our goal here was to eradicate a satellite population, so we used products that were available and useful for our site. So there are other products that do cover the type of insects that spotted lanternfly are, that are contact pesticides, but typically they're not used. It's most of the time you won't be using bifenthrin for spotted lanternfly. We just did it since we had a different goal in mind. Down in areas like Pennsylvania, New Jersey, where they have more established populations, some companies are doing, like private companies do, contact pesticides around people's homes for where it's like a nuisance pest. But that's just that just minimizes some of the number of insects around people's homes. There are also there's a huge amount of different pesticides that are used on crops. So in grape vineyards, in orchards that are seeing spotted lanternfly, and Penn State University has some really great guidelines and handouts that kind of go through some of the different uses and options. They've done a bit of research. It's a new insect. We're less than a decade into identifying it here. So that's, on terms of like research, a really short lifespan of figuring out what is actually useful. Most of the time in situations like ours, the using of a systemic like Dinotefron is the go-to, since it has been proven to be the most effective, particularly when you are dealing with Ailanthus in combination with spotted lanternfly.
Thank you very much. Excellent answer. I am putting a link to the management guide in the chat. Also, I'm noting that it's 11:15, which is when we said we were going to end. But if our panelists are willing and attendees can, I would like to keep going with the Q&A. Nicole and Astra, are you able to stay? Okay, great.
I'm fine, yep.
Okay, great. Because there's definitely some questions here that I think you could help weigh in on, and I feel like I knew which one I was going to ask first. Hold on one second. Let me just scroll down. Too much multitasking. Are there any known natural predators? Another great question. There are definitely natural predators for spotted lanternfly. There are things that are consuming it here. There is even a project out of Pennsylvania that is tracking, again, through the iNaturalist app, that is tracking observations of things eating spotted lanternfly. There are birds that will eat it. I have seen pictures of spiders eating it. I've seen praying mantises feeding on them. None of them are doing it at anywhere near a rate that would be needed to have an impact on spotted lanternfly. So they're not going to be curative. I think that because of what spotted lanternfly tends to feed on tree of heaven, that they are not very tasty to the things that are eating them. So it's sort of, again, like Lymentria dispar, like yes, things will prey on them, but not enough to have an impact. Let's see. All right, sorry. A lot of people concerned that they missed a poll question. I will try to get back to you. Not if there's 300 of you though. Is horticultural oil effective in controlling egg masses? And I'm hoping that Astra could sort of back me up on this. I know that there's a lot of research going on in heavily infested areas with using golden oil to treat the egg masses. And in fact, a lot of states like Virginia and West Virginia have kind of transitioned over from doing the bifen applications to now treating egg masses with golden oil. As Nicole mentioned, this is all very new, so it's being thought of as research. Like, they're not sure how effective it's being. We all know that horticultural oil can vary in its effectiveness depending on the time of year when it's applied and the temperature and rain. But I don't know if Astra, if you had heard anything else that you wanted to add. Sorry to put you on the spot.
I mean, I don't know that they think it's 100% effective, but I think Nicole might actually be the better one to answer that.
There has been studies where it can be like, you can really smother an egg mass and limit any emergence. But the really challenging thing is in a field-based thing, like actually finding egg masses, knowing that you're covering all the egg masses, knowing that you're covering them completely, and that environmental conditions allow those oils to stay on. So I think in the future we might see more products or methods that can be useful, but I think at this point right now, we don't have a fully effective control method. We have methods that can decrease some of your population.
Thank you. I am poorly multitasking again. Hold on one second. Let me just send this. Okay, a bunch of other pesticide related questions. It's possible, Nicole, you might have answered them already. So just like, or spoken about them already, but so someone was asking about the use of the bucket trucks for bifenthrin use, and also the concern about drift for Dinotefron, but I don't think that's an issue for injection. They're just basically just kind of asking about what a private firm would do. But before you answer sort of the logistics of the bucket truck part, I just want to point out, like, we are not advising any private folks to do pesticide treatments at this point. We're asking, this pest is not established here yet. So if you find an infestation, you should contact the state. And a lot of what we're talking about that's being done in other states, if it's being done by private contractors, they're contracting with the state. So this is a regulatory issue. But Nicole, I didn't know if you had anything to add about bucket trucks. I don't know.
I mean, we used it because we were trying to really target something in the canopy, and that was the tool we had available to us. I don't think private companies really won't be trying to kill every spotted lanternfly in a canopy in late season ever. And a lot of like big companies that do a lot of treatments, they have other tools for spraying into canopies when they are doing pesticide applications in canopies. They're not out there in a bucket truck. They have better tools than I had on hand, but that's what we had to be able to get in there and do that. And it's I know that people want to kind of this is something that's coming, it's on the forefront, and something people want to be knowledgeable and prepared for that are in the industry. But at this time, I think there is quite a bit of time before we will be having private industries or private homeowners or landowners doing any pesticide treatments here in Massachusetts.
Okay, so somebody asked a related question. Do you have a recommended treatment for tree of heaven? And before I see if either of the other panelists want to weigh in, I will say that I know that some states are kind of advocating for tree of heaven removals. I've talked to folks at Penn State Extension about this, and it's somewhat controversial. I mean, we've never managed to remove a host plant to prevent the spread of any pest or pathogen. And I think that because spotted lanternfly is prolificus. It has many other hosts that it can complete its life cycle on. I'm not sure it necessarily makes sense to try to remove Tree of Heaven, because in a way it's going to kind of make it more cryptic. Like if the Tree of Heaven is around, then you can check for lanternfly on that. If you try to remove the Tree of Heaven, it's going to disperse into things that are harder to detect lanternfly on, like grape and maple and things like that. But I don't know if Nicole had any, if you've ever done Tree of Heaven removals, it's possible. It is an invasive.
So in Massachusetts, we have not I mean, maybe like 100 years ago, people were trying to remove it, but we typically don't target it for removals. It's well established. And even though it is kind of abundant throughout our state, it doesn't threaten our native forests. In some other states, it becomes more established in their disturbed forests and kind of outplaces native trees, but we don't really see that. We typically find it in really disturbed areas that wouldn't really support like a beautiful oak tree anyway. So it hasn't been a big concern for us. And at this point, the research doesn't show that completely eliminating Ailanthus eliminates your risk for spotted lanternfly anyway. It does have a broad host. It has in the lab completed its life cycle on several other species. It just is attracted to Tree of Heaven. So as spotted lanternfly becomes established in the state, there may be people that are like homeowners that have like 1 or 2 trees in their yard that may want to get them removed just to minimize the number of spotted lanternfly are attracted. And there are some methods, but it is challenging to remove Tree of Heaven. It likes to live. It's going to try its hardest to keep going. And most of the time, a really effective removal does involve an herbicide. So things like hack and squirt, where you're cutting into the tree and getting herbicides right into its cambium layer to move those materials in before you cut down and remove the tree, because you want to kill its root system before you cut down the tree as well. So it is an involved process, and it does involve bringing herbicides into your landscape, which some people do not prefer to do.
Thank you. All right, maybe we'll take another couple questions, and then I got to scoot because I'm going to spend the next 2 days trying to process all of the pesticide credits. Is there any research out of Pennsylvania or New Jersey relevant to the mortality rate of infested plants? That is a really good question, and I feel like there's a related question here about the impact. Right, someone else was asking about the risk of native maples in contiguous forests, and how often SLF has infested native maples in states where SLF is most prominent. Okay, I will say that research is ongoing on this topic, what the impacts are. They have definitely shown that there is an impact in vineyards, that in terms of, the plants not putting out shoots and not putting out as much fruit when they're attacked. To me, it's an easy correlation between this and understanding that there's going to be an impact on native grapes that often make up a significant part of the forest understory, or a lot of our native landscape and sort of more edge habitat is grapes. So I'm concerned about the impact on that. I don't think I have seen anything specific on maples or other native trees yet. I think go ahead. If you have something to add, go for it.
Yeah, so recently, U.S. Forest Service entomologists throughout the Northeast kind of all got together and looked at the research we have so far on spotted lanternfly and its impact on our native trees. And they kind of identified that, I think on an individual basis, like they can be damaging sometimes to an individual tree, but spotted lanternfly does not pose a significant threat to our native forests. So Tree of Heaven, a different story, but our native maples are on a larger landscape scale going to be okay.
All right, that's interesting. I think I'm going to wait to see the peer-reviewed literature on that. So I'm a little skeptical, but I think it makes sense. Although the other thing is, I mean, there was recently a paper published about how trees that are impacted by invasive pests are not sequestering as much carbon as trees that aren't, and therefore that might have an impact on climate change. So I thought that was really interesting too. But it's good to know. I almost wonder, like, when we say stuff like that, are people like, well, why do we even have to worry about it? But I think in February, we're going to try to talk a little bit more in that webinar about like the impact to our ability to just be out in a forest or out in a park in heavily infested areas, and the way that there's like an impact on quality of life. But I hope that that is true, that there's not a strong impact. All right, let's see. Try to take one more question that is relevant to here. I feel like, Nicole, you answered the question about, the effect on trees of an injection. So
I think I just want to say that so when you do an injection, you're drilling into a tree, and it does cause some damage to the tree to cause a wound like that. And a bigger mature tree can handle those wounds, but on a small tree, if you're making too much damage, it can really girdle the tree, which is why you don't do it on trees under a certain size.
Okay. I think that we're done here. Thanks to everybody who stayed. You did not have to stay this late in order to receive your pesticide credits. I know a lot of folks were asking that, and I tried to answer that in the Q&A. Unless the panelists have anything else to say, I'm going to thank everybody for attending. It was a big crowd. I appreciate everybody's patience. I know we always go a little bit longer than we say we're going to, but we had a lot of really interesting discussion. For those of you that are looking for pesticide license credits, you'll be hearing from me before Thanksgiving, feasibly. And we'll post an archive before then as well. And I hope that all of you enjoyed today and will join us for our February session. Thank you very much.